when would you say, like, how did tattoos originate in Japan? How did they make their way here?
How did they make their way here? Well, tattoos didn't necessarily make their way here.
Mm-hmm.
Tattooing is one of those things that several cultures on Earth developed independently.
Right.
You know, with their own power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that goes for several other islands in the Pacific, most notably, you know, like the Maori of New Zealand,
mm-hmm.
those Hawaiians, other Polynesian islands. You know, most people are pretty familiar with that. And of course, Japan also developed tattooing culture.
Right.
And I think what kind of sets it apart is that, you know, the Japanese began. I mean, this is where the earliest tattoos, probably, you know, things in the Jomon period. You know, like serious, like tribal marking kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not so different from the other islands. And then that fell out of vogue pretty quick. It's really hard to trace tattooing back that far because there aren't a lot of samples of it left to look at. But later we start to see tattooing used as criminal markings, like making bands or dots on the arm or on the head, you know, to mark a person for certain types of crime.
So this is that their village would know that they were a criminal.
Yeah, like, hey, this guy's a murderer, this guy's a rapist, this guy's a thief, or whatever. That's how they would mark you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so eventually, what happens is during, you know, the Edo period, the Suikoden, which is the water margin
mm-hmm.
tale, which is the tale of the 108 heroes. It's a Chinese novel that comes into Japan, and
mm-hmm.
it's translated into Japanese. And this is coinciding with about the time when woodblock prints and the printing press type of technology in Japan is really taking off. And so it's not the first novel to be translated into Japanese, and it's not the first novel that these, you know, people are experiencing. But this is sort of the first time you have a rising middle class, a more literate class. You have this big novel coming in, and it's combined with printing technology. So this isn't just aristocrats reading little poems to each other that no one else can understand. This is like a boom, right? And this Suikoden takes Edo, which is modern-day Tokyo, kind of takes it and the rest of Japan by storm. Mm-hmm. And people are reading about these heroes. And not only that, you have these ukiyo-e woodblock print artists who are carving these plates that are being seen alongside this writing. And so you have all these people who are reading this, and they're seeing the pictures go along, and this is a major phenomenon for the people at the time. And some of the warriors in those tales are described as having drawings and tattoos that take up their whole bodies, and the ukiyo-e print artists a lot of times are just imagining what this looks like, drawing pictures of it. And a lot of people, you know, this kind of wealthy merchant class, for example, are seeing these things, and they're like, oh man, like, I want to have something like that. You know, I want a tattoo like that. You know, not so different from people in this day and age, right?
Right.
If you really think about it. So this isn't the total origin of the Japanese tattoo, but this is a big point where Japanese tattooing really starts to push into that full body, I mean, a giant piece of art on your body. And not just like a little tattoo here, right? But I mean, good grief, arm pieces. Mm-hmm. Sleeves aren't like pieces. Sleeves frame the back, mm-hmm. you know. This is like, I mean, huge ukiyo-e prints, painstakingly hand-poke tattooed, you know, with tebori onto somebody's body. And so this is when that really starts to evolve as an art form. You even have, in a lot of cases, ukiyo-e, woodblock artists, modifying their tools mm-hmm. And transitioning into some of the modern-day tattoo families. There's other groups that start getting tattoos at this point. A lot of firemen, the young men, the town protectors, some of the violence groups at the time, things that would evolve into a lot of the modern day Yakuza, they start getting tattoos as well. A lot of the firemen, for example, have sort of those protective deities tattooed on their backs, you know. So.
And also for like their bodies to be recognized if they're too badly burnt. Is that correct?
I've heard that before, but I haven't researched that to that degree. I mean, one would imagine if one was burnt so badly, their tattoos might not be visible. But a lot of times, yeah, you definitely hear it more as like a protective charm.
Okay, so they're actually getting like protective gods and different spirits on their body.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely, and a lot of that too. I mean, a lot of that's cultural too. I mean, I think firefighters, you know, maybe in this day and age too, who knows? But especially in that time, there was sort of like a sexy chic to firefighters as well. Okay. You know, that was kind of like the that was what people were into. That was a very heroic occupation.
Okay.
Fires especially in ancient Japan, when the buildings were all wood, I mean, those were major deals, man.
Right.
I mean, a fire in that time wasn't just like, oh yeah, the guy's house caught fire and we put it out before it's. I mean, it was like there would be major damage. Whole neighborhoods could burn. So it was a very dangerous occupation, you know. And so even in old ukiyo-e woodblock prints themselves, you'll see depictions of firefighters, you know, holding their big banners for their fire company. That's why they always hold those big things, so that during the big fires, they would know. Firefighting wasn't something that was controlled by the government. It was like private, independent companies. So it was so everyone around could see, oh, it's this guy that's putting out the fire. So when it's done with, this is the guy that gets paid, or whatnot. Or this is how the insurance payoff goes, or whatever. So anyway, those were another large group of people who were getting tattoos.
Okay.
And so what eventually happens after that is that these groups begin to evolve, they begin to change, the times begin to change, tattooing gets more and more elaborate, begins to grow, and where the central government has less power, you sort of have these local anikis, these local older brother types who are sort of keeping the order and keeping the peace in these little provinces, right, in smaller towns, and even to some extent in the larger cities, in the little boroughs. And so these are the guys that really start to evolve into the modern day Yakuza, and I'll spare you a whole history of the Yakuza, but that's sort of when that association begins, and you start to move forward in time to today, and then as far as, like, I think that, you know, fuck, I said all this so much more eloquently the last time I talked about it. I'll edit that part out.
That's fine.
Edit out the part where I cry.
Well, what about the administration of tattoos? How were they first administered? You're saying these people who were making the art and the books were actually the first people to administer the tattoos?
In some cases, yeah. In some cases, no. I mean, some of these ukiyo-e print artists transitioned themselves into tattoo artists, and there were certainly other people who were raised up as tattoo artists at the time. I mean, that's sort of. There's a lot of that history that's a little bit bleak as well, that nobody really knows exactly, but that's generally how it's thought to be.
And this was through Teibori?
This was yeah, what you call Teibori, which means literally to carve with the hands. And sometimes there's a lot of perception from Westerners, oh, that's the stuff that's done with the bamboo, or that's the stuff that's done with the hammer and the blow. There's no hammers used, you know. Some of the tools are fashioned out of bamboo, some are fashioned out of different kinds of wood, some are fashioned out of metal, you know, and it's the same kinds of principles, that, you know, needles that are lined up, bound to sticks, and then they're just, you know, one stroke at a time, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, they just go in one at a time like that.
And that's still done today, even?
Oh yes, it's still practiced today. In fact, there has been quite a resurgence of people who study Teibori, even in sort of modern tattoo studios like this. There's sort of this reconnection of the modern Japanese tattooer with their Japanese roots. Because what sort of happens is, okay, just to wrap up this history and then bring us full circle, right? You know, Japanese tattooing continues getting in, bam, World War II comes along, right? And all resources are sort of poured into the war effort. Japan loses the war. And it's devastated. The whole country's devastated. You know, Hiroshima, Nagasaki have been bombed, decimated, and the country's just in ruins, right? And there's nowhere to go. And for a period, the American occupation actually outlaws that tattooing. Eventually, it becomes occupation before Japan's return to the Japanese. And you know, these tattooers, you know, they begin to sort of. Everyone's putting their lives back together at this point, but now tattooing has really been closed off even more than before the war. So now you really have a stigma on it, okay? And that is how it sort of evolves into that sort of peak in the, you know, this is the time where Japan, right, this is the 40s, the 50s, radio, media, manga really starts to take off. Manga takes the country by storm. Look at the influence manga has had on the world today, right? And every time you see the depiction of somebody with a tattoo, whether it's in a manga or an animation or a movie or a song or anything else, it's always in this sort of negative light or in this like oh, it's only people in violence groups, only people who are part of the Yakuza, only, you know, bad boys, all outlaws, they're the only ones who get tattoos. And so that, as Japan becomes mass mediated, as manga and animation movies begin to spread across the country and really take over, and you know, that begins to go forward. Every kid who's raised in that era, every time they see a tattoo, they make that association, and that's the only way that tattoos are ever portrayed at all until you get in, well, even until about like the 70s, the 80s, and even into the 90s and today. Maybe less so now, but you know, the idea that a pop star would have like a tattoo on her shoulder, that would be like, that's finally something that you're starting to see today, you know, and this is, you know, it's nearly 2010.
Right,
okay?
right.
That's like, I mean, it's almost surreal to us, because that image was starting to be shaken as early as the 60s and 70s in the West, you know. But in Japan, that stereotype clung on for much longer. And so eventually, then you get all these guys in Japan who they want to be tattooists, they're into it, and they want to break out of this tattoo equals Yakuza stereotype. They want to bust free. And so you get to about, I think, people like Sabato from Eccentric Tattoo, people like Washo, also studied with Sabato and Eccentric. And Sabato studied all over the world, and he comes back to Japan, and he opens this tattoo studio, and it's not a secret location where you have to be led there blindfolded to the old sensei. It's not like that. It's a public-facing, street-facing street shop. Okay, and that's different. That's very radical and different for the time. Now, we don't think that in the States, because we have a different timeline for tattooing and a different kind of culture in the West in general. But here, definitely, that's a new thing. And so you have all these other guys who they want to open shops, and so they just start doing it. And as they do so, to break that image, they start jumping into Western designs. You know, all the traditional Western type of, you know, sparrows, panthers, nautical stars,
dice cherries.
Anything that, dice cherries, anything that isn't like Japanese. You know, they want to get totally away from it. They want to break that image, and that kicks off like a tattoo boom of sorts in Japan in the mid-90s and into the late 90s. And so you have all these, you know, if you look at a lot of the 35 to 40-year-old tattooers in Japan today, that's mostly what they've got done, as opposed to, you know, stuff like this.
Right.
So what happens eventually after that is the need to break out of that stereotype decreases. Tattoos, although they're not totally acceptable, and as acceptable as they are in the West, they are much more acceptable than they were 15 years ago. I mean, there aren't TV shows or anything like that, but it's on its way, right? And so now that that's happened, the need to do a Western design to break out of a stereotype has decreased, and so now what you're seeing is a return to traditional Japanese designs. Even among the clientele, more people are interested in getting things that connect them back to their roots. They don't have to feel embarrassed about being Japanese, or embarrassed about Japanese culture, or embarrassed about what their grandparents did during the war. You know, this is a new generation, and there's even a newer generation coming up after that that's even less inclined to be so worried about, you know, Japanese.
So we're finding that they're becoming
imagery.
more popular and more accepted.
Definitely. More popular, more accepted, and then now you'll see that that actually starts to take account for the majority of orders is Japanese style work, not just from foreign clientele, but from Japanese clientele.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Without getting into too much detail, how
That's possible.
Yeah. How do tattoos connect to modern day crime syndicates?
To modern day, okay. Well, Japanese tattoo families today, or excuse me, Japanese crime families today, still get tattoos. They still go and, you know, have their big bodysuits put in. A lot of the times that's done through one particular family. A lot of times one particular Yakuza family will go to one particular tattoo family to have the work done. That's a lot of times, though, those families members in certain cases are also free to go to other tattoo shops. They tend to make the most distinction between a traditional Japanese tattoo family and a modern Japanese tattoo studio. A lot of times they'll make a distinction on the level of a traditional Japanese tattoo family is all about repeating motifs, keeping tradition. Whereas a modern studio, oh, that's art. That's different.
Right.
You know, that isn't repetition of motifs and keeping tradition. That's art over there. But they appreciate that as art, as if a traditional Japanese hand poke tattoo isn't art, right? Well, of course it is, but they tend to look at it with a different sort of eye. But yeah, modern Japanese crime families, violence groups, yakuza, yeah, they still get tattooed just as much as they ever did. That's something that doesn't really change.
And so you're saying a family, they go to a family, so this is handed down through generations.
Yeah, you mean
the art of tattooing?
Yeah, definitely, most definitely. That's passed down and passed on, not necessarily to your own children, although some cases that is the case. In a traditional Japanese tattoo family setting, you still have a deshishisho, a master and apprentice setting, and what happens is usually there'll be several apprentices. One is eventually chosen to succeed, and then he'll take a new name once the succession takes place, and then that name is usually an amalgamation of the master's name and their current name, or another name of the master's choosing. So that's why, you'll see, for example, Horiyoshi III is a good example. Everyone knows Horiyoshi III. Well, his name wasn't always Horiyoshi, but there's obviously a Horiyoshi the first and the second before him, and then eventually, if the family line doesn't break, there'll be a Horiyoshi the fourth. So yeah, definitely, there's a lot of families that go for generations and generations. But like anything, families split, they diverge, they form subfamilies. People have infighting. These apprentices go off here. They start their own ichimon. An ichimon is like a tattooed family, right? And then they'll start under a different name, and you can usually trace it back pretty far. They can trace their own roots better than I could. But yeah.
Okay, great. And then let's just do. Okay, great. And then let's just do couple meanings behind some popular tattoo symbols that we see here in Japan, or I should say designs.
Okay.
We'll just do maybe 3 simple ones. What's the relevance behind the koi that you see a lot?
Okay, well, there's a lot of real popular Japanese motifs. The koi is one of them, and there's a lot of symbolism. In any culture's artwork, there's tons of symbolism, right? And of course, Japan's no exception. And the koi fish is a traditional motif that you see in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean art. In Japanese art, a lot of times when you see it, the koi is usually struggling upward, usually against a waterfall. So it's a very manly symbol. The koi nobori, the koi banners are hung during the Boys Festival, which is May 5th every year. It's a symbol of strength for boys to become strong. It's a very masculine tattoo.
To fight upstream.
Exactly. It's usually a symbol of fall. You'll see it paired with maple leaves a lot of times, though not exclusively. It's generally sort of has like a fall kind of a feel to it, right? Another way that you sometimes see the koi displayed is one climbing up and one climbing down. This goes back to Chinese art as well. You'll see a black and a red koi, which are referred to as like a higoi and a magoi, and that symbolizes like the sun and the moon. Yin yang, male, female. It's a duality sort of a motif. And so that's actually, I have that motif depicted on my ribs.
Oh, okay.
So that's another symbol of the koi. Koi have whiskers, right? Which is why dragons also have whiskers, because eventually when they, according to an older Chinese legend, when a certain koi fought its way upstream past a certain castle gate, eventually it turned into a dragon. And so keeping the whiskers on a dragon is sort of with respect.
Showing the transformation.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay. So what about the dragon? What's the significance behind the dragon that we see?
Dragons, you could go on and on forever. The dragon figures into almost all Asian cultures in some way. It's sort of this thing that's outside of space and time. I mean, the Chinese used to think of it as this massive thing when they see those big rolling mountains in the mist. That was like the back of the dragon, right? The dragon's an amalgamation of several animals. Depending on what culture you ask, you're going to get different answers for that. The body of a snake, the talons of an eagle, or
so it's just seen as like an epic beast.
It's a pretty epic beast for sure. The dragon is a long life symbol. Depending on what culture you're in, there's different numbers of fingers or claws on the hand. In China, there's different colors of different dragons for different things. Certain emperors were only allowed to have certain types of dragons, like 9 golden dragons on this one particular emperor's thing, and of course those dragons had 5 claws, and all the people who had dragons depicted on their robes underneath that guy, those dragons could only have 4 claws. I mean, there's a huge pantheon of that stuff. As far as Japanese art is concerned, there's a lot less of that. The motif retains some of its roots to the rest of Asian art, but the Japanese really take it and make it their own, like with so many things. And so you still have this idea of, I think long life and greatness, but a lot of times you'll see dragons as sort of not deities, but very powerful sort of creatures. Like sometimes you'll see them almost as like retainers to like Kannon-sama or to other sort of Buddhist deities. You'll see them in line with warriors. Sometimes you'll see them engaged in battle, but a lot of times they're standing on their own.
To be like you said, like a retainer, like a squire almost.
Sort of like that, more almost in like a dragon's such a powerful symbol that to see it subdued, right? For example, Kannon-sama riding so placidly, on the back, making those gestures of mercy without even moving, riding on the back of a dragon is very violent, movement. Yeah, you're seeing this dragon totally subdued by this deity, and not through violence, but through peaceful means. I mean, that is sort of a contrast you'll see a lot of times.
Okay, so much like a juxtaposition.
Exactly. A lot of times you'll see a dragon paired with a phoenix or a dragon paired with a tiger. Usually those are engaged in battle.
Right.
So there's a lot. It depends on the motif. Sometimes the dragon is by itself. Sometimes the dragon is the Kenryu, which is swallowing a sword whole. Sometimes that sword itself is being held up by Fudomio. So there's a lot of cases where, depending on the context, the dragon has a different meaning. Right. So that's a very difficult motif to explain, but depending on the context, yeah, there's a lot of different...
Okay, great. And then for the last one, what about the Hanyo mask?
The Hanyo mask. Well, the Hanyo mask is merely one mask of theater. Yeah, no theater is very different from kabuki, which people are probably more familiar with, where the actors just paint their face, not just paint their faces, they paint their faces, they have wild clothing. No is much more slow-moving, much more refined. The motif, it's older than kabuki. The themes of no plays are pretty much set in stone. They're very familiar. Usually it involves... a woman is scorned.
Right, hell hath no fury, right?
A woman gets scorned, she takes revenge out on her lover or on her lover's lover.
It's usually like she's been cheated on or something like that.
Yeah, she's been cheated, she's been screwed, she's been snubbed in front of the court. I mean, this was a type of theater that only catered to the aristocracy of the time. Or it's a demon being pacified by a priest. Those are pretty much the main themes of No.
So the actual mask is almost like the overwrought emotion of anger from the woman?
Well, the Hanyo mask then, every actor in No wears a mask. And the masks are not to show the audience, like in Shakespearean theater or Greek theater. These aren't to say like, oh, hey, I'm this guy, look at my mask. It's to actually, like, as the actor, when you put that on, you're like inside someone else's body. You're inside that character. It's to help the actor get into character. So, on all the actors in No are male, even when they're female. So, when you look at the Hanyo mask, No mask's okay. It's such an old art. This is before, like, stage lighting, and they did have some pretty elaborate setups, but the reason that No masks, especially the Hanyo mask, are so incredible is because depending on the direction of light, you can cast different emotions with the mask. So even with the typical woman mask, right? When she tips her head down, she's smiling. When she tips it back, she's crying. When she looks forward, it's a much more placid look. And so when you've got the Hanyo mask, it's the same thing. When we think of like angry eyes in the West, they're like this, but in Japan, it's not just like angry, it's like suffering. She's really upset. She's become so upset that she's been overtaken by her emotions, and she's not possessed by a demon so much as she transforms. Into that evil spirit. And sometimes the Hanyo mask, pictures that disembodied spirit the woman is still sleeping in her quarters, right? And then that Hanya mask really comes out, and it goes off, and eventually goes to take revenge on this person that's wronged the female lead in the play. And so that's why when you see that Hanya mask and it really dips down and the eyes are really set back, it really looks not just evil and angry, but distraught and sad. And that's why a lot of times when the priest exorcises that demon, a lot of times the female protagonist dies. No, it's actually very tragic, and so there's a lot of pain and sadness and tragedy that figures into No Theater. It isn't like, oh, and then the demon was expelled and she went back to living her life and found a new guy and everything was cool. You know, it isn't really like that. And so that's why the Hanya mask has a lot of really deep, significance in the No Theater and as a motif in Japanese tattoos as well.
All right, excellent. All right, so for a final thing, any shout-outs you want to give? Any?
One of the other things, sit down, otherwise we'll be looking up. All right. So one of the other things I had to do for my apprenticeship was I had to paint 5 sheets of flash every week, and it all had to be original. It wasn't copying something. I had to produce 5 original sheets of flash a week on top of my other drawing, and on top of cleaning the toilets, cleaning the shop, breaking down the stage, all the other apprentice stuff that you have to do. And of course, there's no time to do that during the day. So that's why I was so sleep deprived all the time. I was always drawing these things and then painting them. Barely making it the last day. And I think I painted about 255 sheets of flash. Some were better than others, some were not so good. But it was a real good learning experience. So they're really big on that screwing up on paper first, and then screwing up on yourself first, before you go and screw it up on other people, which is a good way to be. So, I mean, I did so many of those flash drawings that eventually there was a flash company called, it's actually a tattoo supply company called Pulse, and their publishing arm Presto even did this little, collection of all this stuff that...
And this is actually a book that's in the tattoo shop that people can actually pick up, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got some copies of it left here. I mean, they sell this thing on Amazon, too. But
it's on Amazon, too?
Yeah, but I mean, this was I was painting these full-color flash sheets. They kind of let me paint whatever I wanted to, which was cool. But, I mean, this was just I was painting lots of Japanese motifs, stuff like this, black and gray, Japanese stuff, just everything,
From traditional to street stuff.
Yeah, it really got my painting and my drawing skills up to par. More than that, it was kind of getting me in the mood to draw every day. So I was practicing traditional Japanese motifs and modern Western motifs.
So this has not only your art, but it also kind of logs your trials to getting to where you are today with the tattoo.
Yeah. There's a little introduction there that kind of explains it. I mean, it's called Hanamichi, which is the flower road, which is a traditional kabuki. It's a bridge that's part of the kabuki stage, which is how actors sort of make their entrance onto the stage. So this is I wasn't even tattooing yet. And it was pretty cool that Pulse decided they wanted to publish this. I was so broke, man. I had no money. And I called Pulse because there was a friend of a friend, special thanks, Corey Kruger, John Clue, Brett, Jessica. I called them up and I was like, dude, I'm sitting on all this flash. Do you think we could maybe sell a flash set? And I told him what I had and what I was sitting on, and he was like, well, why don't we do a book? And I was like, really? Of course, that was kind of one of those things though that it's scary and embarrassing, and you're nervous about doing that because I had no tattoo cred at all at that point, and it was oh, I'm not in any position to be putting out a book. But I was they were very generous and helpful, and we picked out some of the best ones, and it was really a nice little thing that kind of chronicles how I
I've taken a look through. I mean, it's a quality book. I mean, it's really cool.
Cheers, man. I'd like to do a number 2, maybe a sequel that's sort of the apology book to everybody who bought the first book.
Well, just to show you how you've progressed through the years.
Well, yeah, every artist, I think, if they're diligent, you progress through your artistic career as you go along. But yeah, so that was another thing. Yeah.
Excellent.